Since 2020, Common App, Reach Higher, and Collegewise have joined forces to celebrate high school counselors who exemplify dedication to student success by supporting access to post-secondary options. In addition to our 4-week webinar series, we are excited to join counselors in Indiana later this month for a full day in-person training at Butler University. While there, we will honor our third our third Excellence in College Counseling recipient, Jennifer Martin of Salem High School in Salem, Indiana. Jennifer has been a school counselor since 1996 at a number of schools in both Indiana and Kentucky, and she is currently the college counselor at her alma mater, Salem High School. She's a first-generation college graduate and has been an educator her entire career. Jennifer has shown an unwavering dedication to her students in her 13 years at SHS, proven by a consistently increasing FAFSA submission rate year over year, even through the pandemic, which we all know is not a small feat. So congratulations to Ms. Martin. Our teams cannot wait to meet you in person in just a few short weeks. And we hope that many of you in the Indianapolis area will join us in person for this recognition and professional development on Tuesday, March 15th, again at Butler University. To kick off our first webinar of 2022, Pandemic R.E.S.T, 4 key components to help students and educators thrive during these uncertain times, I'd like to introduce Dr. Brandie Oliver, Associate Professor and Director of School Counseling at Butler University. Before Dr. Oliver's current role, she worked most recently as a middle school counselor, but also has experience at the elementary and high school levels. Brandi sees her role as a resource and support for all educators. Specifically, she hopes to be an advocate and a source of positive change for all students, parents, and educators. Her specific areas of interest include social, emotional learning, trauma-responsive education, suicide prevention and intervention, comprehensive school counseling, restorative practices, and ensuring all of this work is done through a lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and mattering. Dr. Oliver is the co-author of the Indiana Department of Education's Social Emotional Learning Competencies and worked on a team to develop a model policy and resource documents in response to the suicide prevention policy, helped develop research-based instructional support that address the child abuse and child sexual abuse training required for all K-12 students, and help produce resources for the positive school discipline model policy for IDOE. Dr. Oliver has served on both state and national boards, and currently she is serving on the Evidence-Based School Counseling Advisory Board. Welcome, Brandi.
I guess I need to unmute myself now, don't I? Thank you. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here. All right. So I'm going to get started. I have a slide deck to share, and I do welcome any comments or questions, and hopefully we'll have time to answer those. And if for some reason I do run out of time, go ahead and put it in your chat, and I will try to respond to those and maybe share out like a Google Doc or something later if by chance we do run out of time. All right. So let me get over here. Okay. Is that okay the way I have that up here, or is that all right with everybody? All right. So again, I was excited to do this, and I'm very eager to talk about these topics. And when I was talking with Meredith, I was like, there's so much going on. I love that you were talking about the rates of success despite the craziness that we've been living through for the last 2 years with the pandemic. And I think it's incredible, but it's like I was talking to my students last night. We have a new mask policy at my university, and there's tension still in the room about, do we keep masks? Do we not, wear masks? And so I feel like it's constant, like what we're talking about still around the pandemic. So I'm a big fan of acronyms. I'm like, when I was putting this presentation together, I thought of like, we all need some rest. I don't know about you, but sometimes I just need to hit pause. And so that's what I'm going to be focusing on, is these 4 key components of the word rest. So let me so we think about resilience. I know all of us as educators, and we've seen our students really develop, I think, resiliency skills. And so how can we continuously develop that resiliency? Emotional well-being is the E piece. And so I'll go into a little bit of what I mean by that. And then support. And support is twofold in my eyes. It's always about, we've got to take care of ourselves first. So supporting our own wellness, and then the support that we need to seek from healthy relationships. So that's kind of the idea between the me and the we. And then the T in rest is transitions. And so I think about like proactive education and programming. So we are prepared, having the ability to adapt, and which we've all been pretty good at, I think, of adaptability, and then keeping a growth-oriented mindset. So as I continue, so I could have put a whole lot of stats up here, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to kind of avoid that. So what have we learned? What have we learned over the last 2 years? We've seen a higher increase in stress, and that's, again, both in our students, K-12. I've seen that in our college undergraduate students and our graduate students. We've seen, higher rates of educator burnout, attrition rates, absenteeism. And again, I see that at all levels around students and educators. What we know is unfortunately lowering is our job satisfaction, our happiness levels, the ability to be well, and not just physically, but emotionally, cognitively, socially, like all those components of wellness. And then we've seen a decrease in motivation. So again, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but it is important to think about, like, these are big things that are impacting the ability to rest, so to speak. So I have a 2 slides, because there has been, and I don't know that we will know the long-term effects of the trauma that's happened due to the pandemic and all of the other factors that are happening around not just our country, but around the globe. I feel like it just is continuous with racial incidents, with political incidents, with obviously what's happening in our country now, or in the world with Ukraine and Russia. So the pandemic is like one huge piece of it, but there's so many other factors. So trauma is an important piece to talk about. And it can come in so many different forms, as I was just mentioning, but it has a significant impact on our brain development and the way that we react or respond to life circumstances. And so I think we have to be mindful of, yes, all these things are happening, but these are all traumatic experiences, and the way that each of us, and that means our students or adults, respond will be different, right? It's a unique experience to each of these different events and circumstances in our lives. So we know that if we are in a stressed state, a stressed brain state, we're not able to learn, we're not able to be in that relaxed mind, to be able to really fully engage, to be fully present. It will impact our regulation skills. It will impact those healthy connections that we need to be able to thrive. So trauma and learning is so important. So we have to be really mindful about what's happening, not just in our own lives, right, but what's also happening in the students' lives, and being able to understand that. I always talk about the difference between reacting and responding, and to really try to work from that response approach, because we just don't know what people are walking into our offices with, or walking into the doors of our classrooms or our buildings. So trying to be responsive in our approach rather than reactive, because it's easy, because we also are experiencing obviously different traumatic experiences. So how do we hit pause enough to know, okay, I need to be responsive rather than reactive? And so that kind of leads to the first R of the REST model, I guess, or REST approach, is developing resilience. So I have a couple of quotes throughout. I'm a big quote person. If you ever were in my classes, my students all know I love quotes. So do not judge me by my success, but judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again. And this quote's by Nelson Mandela. And so I think that has been a repeated pattern that we've all been experiencing. We've kind of had different, we think we've got this great plan in place, and now there's a new policy, right? Or there's this new thing that we have to respond to. So it's been this constant cycle of adapting and overcoming and then moving forward. And so I really do want to acknowledge that resiliency has been built over the last couple of years and will continue to do so. but we have to stay focused on it as well. So again, I just wanted to, in my framework of resilience, this is what it means. I think so often we think of resilience as just bouncing back from something, so a hardship or a trauma or an adversity. And it is, right? We are going to be able to come back and restart, but it's also knowing what we learned from that experience, right? How did we grow? How did we become stronger? How did we take that experience and learn from it to be able to move forward? So I like the phrase, it's not just about bouncing back, but it's also about springing forward. So I feel like this resiliency is just really important because we all know that from what we've learned, we're going to have new things keep being bombarded. So how do we learn from those and then keep moving forward? And so I always think about trauma responsive classrooms or trauma responsive learning environments. And it's really critical that building resilience is like fundamental, and it's not just focused on our students, but on all educators as well. So this is a model that I've tried to develop over time, and I feel like I've messed with it a few times, just adding different things. So again, some of you may look at it and go, oh, she missed something, and I might have. I haven't. I would love to hear. But when I think about a resilient person, these are the kind of characteristics that I think about what that person would bring into the learning environment. And this would not just be for adults, but also for our students. What are we trying to build? Being able to be present and engaged, having that sense of self, that self-acceptance. Being really engaged in problem solving, being collaborative and showing empathy, having empathy, growing their empathy skills, impulse control and emotional awareness, that adaptive and flexible thinking, so cognitive flexibility, having secure attachments and positive relationships, a high sense of self-esteem and self-efficacy, and then being culturally responsive and non-judgmental. So again, this is, and it's huge, right? Like, oh yeah, absolutely. But when we have resiliency, we're able to kind of tap into all these different characteristics depending on what life has thrown our way, right? So we need everything, but certain situations may require more problem solving, or it may require like a moment of hit and pause and saying, who can I go to? Who's that positive relationship in my life that can help me through this, right? So it's all of these are super important, but then there's also certain events that might need us to engage certain aspects of these characteristics more so than others. So I also have kind of broken it down between educator resilience factors and student. And so there's these 7 C's of resilience that I think about with all of our students. And so not just for like the classroom learning environment, but how do we kind of integrate these into everything. So within our after school activities, within the student court clubs or student organizations, even when we're on college campuses, so that even transition from high school to college or in the workforce, right? What do they need to continuously develop within these 7 C's of resilience? So everyone needs to feel a sense of competence, right? So knowing that they can handle these situations that are going to come, these challenges and the things that we need to overcome. How do we instill confidence? So, and it's more than just self-esteem, but it's knowing that I have the ability, so like self-efficacy, to be able to know that I can do this, right? I have the knowledge and the skill set to be able to engage in whatever's being asked of me. Strong connections, so knowing that they have this supportive community of people. And we all know the stats around at least one trusted adult is vital, and hopefully they have more than that. But again, one trusted adult that they can go to for that sense of connection. The character is the 4th C. So knowing the difference between right and wrong. So that's like that ethical piece of like leadership and ethical development. The 5th C is contribution. And I think we really saw this really early in the pandemic, and I'm sure it was still happening, but unfortunately, I don't think the news necessarily highlighted as much, but there was people wanting to do something, right? We were standing outside hospitals saying thank you, but it was students need to feel like they contribute to society in general, contribute to their schools. So how are we, again, fostering this C of resilience, showing that they do have a place to contribute to the greater good, so to speak. The 6th C is coping. So again, thinking about that proactive piece so we can be responsive, it's really important that we develop multiple coping strategies that are healthy and like strength-based, so we can again engage those when life has thrown us a curveball. And then I think the one that we don't maybe talk about nearly enough in education is students need to feel a sense of control. So I think of that in a way of like student voice. making sure that they have a say, that they feel like they are empowered, that they can use assertive communication, because that is really important also in resiliency development. If not, it feels like people are doing things to you or for you. And I think when we enable our students to be empowered and to be advocates, that feels like you're doing things with them. So I think that that's an important, again, aspect of these 7Cs. So those were how I kind of frame 7Cs of students. And then these are kind of 4 big areas, and you're going to see many of these subcategories come up throughout the presentation. But building educator resilience is like resilient thinking. So that growth-oriented mindset, having those strong positive relationships, being asset-based or using our core strengths, knowing what our personal strengths are and how do we utilize those. And then emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, emotional well-being, again, which you'll see. But to me, like these are the big 4 things that would contribute to like that earlier head vision when we had all those different characteristics for educators specifically. So there's this other, so I think about resilience is internal, right? We have these 3 different pieces. So we have to be able to tell ourselves, I have, and fill in the blank, like, and that's where I contribute to connection and contribution. So who are those people that you have in your life that are your cheerleaders? Who are those people when you're down and out and you just need to like vent to, that they're not going to try to fix your problems. They're just really going to be like attuned to you and listen and engage. So who are those external supports? So that's like that have of internal resilience. And then the middle one is I am, and that goes to knowing and recognizing your personal strengths. And I think this is something I'm always, I guess it's concerned, and I'm kind of baffled. Even when my graduate students were doing activities about acknowledging the strengths that they bring to the classroom or the strengths that they bring to their counseling work, it's hard for students to still like acknowledge their strengths out loud for fear that someone may not think that's their strength. And so it's really hard. Even we did this activity last night in closing. It's interesting. We just went around the room and said, I am, and I fill in the blank with a personal strength. And a few of them, which was great because their peers were having them stop. They're like, no, say that again till you own it. Because it was like, I am trustworthy. But it was like they were questioning, like, but they know that about themselves. So why it keeps us from like owning that part of ourselves, right? So developing your core strengths, your personal strengths, and really knowing what they are and tapping into those strengths when, again, not just in day-to-day activities, but especially when things go, wrong, so to speak, their mistakes, the challenges, the adverse life experiences. And then that I can is that self-efficacy piece again. Being able to know that you have the knowledge, the skills to put these things in place. So I can problem solve, I can engage in conflict resolution. Those are kind of some examples. So again, like this is a big overview to think about resilience and what this can look like. So in each of the R.E.S.T model, I've tried to come up with some specific strategies, both for student specific and then for educator specific. So I am a big advocate of teaching all of our students about the brain. And that is from preschool all the way through, we still talk about it in my graduate class, the aspects of learning and brain development, neuroscience, because I think it just helps us make sense of what's happening within our bodies. And so I think it's really critical that we teach all of our students about brain development. We teach and model emotional regulation skills and strategies that helps with resilience, mindfulness practices, which you'll see that mindfulness will come up again in one of the letters coming up, problem solving, conflict resolution, and really focusing on mindset development. So acknowledging that not everything is going to be perfect. So try to decrease that perfectionistic need in some of our students, and how do we best learn when things don't go the way that we thought that they needed to go? What can we learn, and how can we show that we can overcome those obstacles? So when I think about educator resilience, it's the ability to seek feedback openly and willingly. And so I think that this is not a skill that we just are born with. I think we have to practice both giving and receiving constructive or critical feedback. And so this helps us build our resilience, right? This helps us be open and non-judgmental, open to growth in our self-awareness, our emotional awareness, and helps us engage in conflict. It helps us be problem solvers. And it just really is critical to be at this really authentic seeking, and then hopefully finding someone that you have that reciprocal nature that you can seek and give feedback. I am a big strength. You've heard me talk about strength. So asset-based thinking. And so just being able to maybe even reframe situations. Sometimes I'll talk about when I was a middle school counselor, I had early morning bus duty. I was outside, and being in Indiana, it can get pretty cold in the winter times. It's dark, it's cold. But one of my strengths is I am a people person. So I'm a relationship driven person. So how can I tap my strength of being relational and kind of engaging and bubbly to really say, okay, yeah, this isn't my ideal task. Like, I don't really love being out here at 7 a.m. or 6:45 a.m. because we started school early when it's dark and it's freezing outside. But if I can tap my strength and know that I'm the first face that some of these, well, many of the kids are going to be seeing, if it's not me or my principal, off the school bus. So how do we use our strengths in times where maybe it's not a task that we love, or even when we are faced with hardships, right? So tapping into that asset-based thinking is really critical. So moving on to the E, so emotional well-being. And so I think about this as emotional awareness. And so it's really important to have the ability to recognize and identify our own emotions, ability to sense, recognize, and identify others' emotions. So first we have to know our own stuff, right? And then we'll be able to see it and recognize it in others, which increases empathy as well. So when we have the ability to do this, we can express, manage a range of emotions. And I think this is something we don't talk nearly enough about. And it's not about just taking what's not good, like those negative emotions, and trying to be positive about it, but knowing that we experience this continuum of emotions, and that's okay, right? So but it's more than just anger. Maybe anger is frustration. Maybe actually anger is embarrassment, but it's helping develop this skill of knowing there are a continuum of feelings and emotions, and it's not just happy or sad, angry or surprised, right? So it's helping, again, develop this sense of this wide range of continuum of emotions. Knowing how to have healthy coping behaviors into various emotional situations, being able to adjust to transitions and new experiences, because we know that's typically emotionally charging. When we have change and we've got to do something new or something that feels a little out of our own comfort zones, that can invoke a lot of emotion. So that's really important to have that emotional awareness. And then it helps us develop this high frustration tolerance. So it's not it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be frustrated, but it's not okay to be hopeless, and it's not okay to see red, right? So it's like, how do you be able to engage in these sometimes not fun emotions to feel, but know that it's not hopeless? So that's kind of what we mean by high frustration tolerance. So quickly on the quote, so our emotions need to be as educated as our intellect. It is important to know how to feel, how to respond, and how to let life in, that it can touch you. And so just to me, it reiterates that we spend a lot of time teaching about other things, and yet how much time are we focused about teaching emotional intelligence and teaching our students, and actually just taking time for ourselves to learn about emotional intelligence and emotional awareness. And so, we know it's important to have this emotional insight. We are all different people. We all have different wants and needs, and we all respond differently. So it's really important to, again, have that level of insight for ourselves first, and then it does transfer to having the ability to understand the emotions in others. So I jokingly, whenever I'm out in Indiana schools, I say my goal would be to walk into every single classroom in our state and see an emotional vocabulary word wall. It's happening in some schools by no margin. I'm not near my goal yet, but I think it's critical that we teach about emotions. We as a society are pretty stunted in our emotional vocabulary, our emotional literacy. I think that there's around, they say, between 1,500 and 2,000 words to describe our emotions. And most of us use between 30 and 50. So there's a lot of language that can be taught, that can be practiced, that can be modeled. And so I think it's really important that we start there. And we start by teaching our students that, again, there's a range of feelings, there's a range of words to use in different situations. And then it's also important to help them read emotional cues, because we know our students' brains aren't fully developed. So they often misread maybe like a moment of pause to, they think it's you're mad at them or you're frustrated, right, by a furrowed brow. So it's important, like, or if I have my arms crossed, maybe I'm cold, maybe it's, but they misread it as they think I'm mad or I'm frustrated with them too. So how do we teach students to read emotional cues? Also, the mind, body, emotion awareness is super important because so often we feel our emotions within our bodies. So I know I hold my tension and stress in my shoulders, and sometimes I don't even know, but I'm like really tensed up and I have to be like, okay, wait a minute. So it's helping understand, like, where do you feel your emotions in your body? And if you don't express those and feel those, it can get stuck there, right? Then we can become physically sick as well. So how do we, again, teach not just the vocabulary awareness, but reading emotional cues and then understanding between our feelings in our body and expressing those verbally or in other ways, in healthy ways. So emotional literacy, this is one strategy. If you have been to like a Menards, a hardware store, Lowe's, you might have seen paint cards, right? That's kind of what's in the middle there. And so to help them think about this continuum of feelings that I know I've talked about a few times now, this is a fun activity for our students. And I've done this with adults and even like school resource officers, and they all loved it. So I feel like it can be a very helpful activity, or a color wheel. Some of you may have seen like the color wheel of emotion. So just getting a blank one. But the idea is, I never really prescribe like, green has to be jealous, or blue has to be sad. I let people pick the feeling to the color that they want. But again, helping them then say, okay, so think of anger, and then what would you put on this continuum? So you can kind of see some examples there. So it's a fun activity. It also helps build their emotional vocabulary, and it helps them to think about this range of feelings within what they might have previously thought was like stagnant, right? So I know I'm sad, but within that sad, you can see like upset, bummed, disappointed. Maybe I really wasn't sad. Maybe I was just kind of like disappointed, or maybe I was a little frustrated. It really wasn't sadness. So it's a fun activity to maybe include in your own development, or if you're doing some work with your students as well. As far as educator, emotional well-being, everything I said for student, I think can apply to us as all of the adults as well. But here's just a couple of additional ones. I love personal mantras. I think that sometimes we get stuck in our own heads and we can tell ourselves pretty negative things. And so just kind of creating something that makes sense to you, and it can be very simple. I know sometimes it's like, just take a breath, or I got this. I will tell my students a lot of times, you got this, right? Like, so what is it that you can quickly tell yourselves when you're starting to become maybe emotionally overwhelmed? You're recognizing, like, in your own mind body awareness, like, I just need to breathe. But that can be really helpful in our own emotional well-being. And then it's important to express our emotions. Again, not hold them in. It's important that we name our emotions. So I feel, and I will kind of do a quick thing here. So it's important not to become your emotion. So instead of saying I am sad, saying I feel sad, because that is the acknowledgement of I'm feeling something, but I'm not becoming the emotion. And then to try to follow up with like, okay, so now that I'm feeling this, what am I going to do? And so I just gave an example, like, I'm feeling frustrated right now. I need to focus on my breathing for a few minutes. And maybe that's before I go talk to this student, or before I go talk to my colleague, right? So whatever it is, it's kind of demonstrating the acknowledgement of emotion, identifying it, and then also what am I going to do to respond rather than react. So here's just another quote. It's not enough just to know how other people think or feel, but we also need to be concerned about them and be ready to help. I think this is a vital life skill for both kids and adults, and such an addition to social emotional learning would be an important next step for schools. And that's by Daniel Goleman. I love a lot of his work. If you've not ever had any of his books, he's got some really great work out there in the realm of neuroscience and emotional well-being. So I would encourage, again, he's a great author. So to transition to another, I got a quote from another great author, is by Bruce Perry, but thinking about support, again, vital. And there's no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship. So we have to have those supportive people in our lives to be able to thrive in times when we feel like everything has just been like crashed, right? Everything that we thought we knew is now we don't know. So who do we have that we can go to in those times? So the way described it was like the me and we, right? So to me is focusing on our own selves, our own self-care. And then the we is making sure we do have healthy relationships. I think we most of us have moved beyond the thought that self-care is selfish or it's a guilty pleasure. And I just always want to reiterate, like, it is not a luxury. It is vital to our own well-being and our own ability to thrive in these very difficult times. And so we to be able to be fully present and in a healthy relationship with anyone, we have to be healthy, right? So I think that that's where it starts with that me piece. And then, of course, we need the we piece because we need healthy relationships because they are foundational to supporting us, and then we can support others as well. So in the world of school, it's not obviously just student and teacher, but it's also between our colleagues and between our families. So there's a lot of components within that we piece of healthy relationships. So brains grow best in the context of supportive relationships, low levels of stress, and through the creative use of stories. And so I think that to me, storytelling is great as far as a teaching strategy, but it's about what I've noticed with Zoom and all of our lovely online platforms is when I'm with my colleagues now in person, we've started to now have like in-person meetings more regularly, and I see my students are in person. We have missed just talking to each other, right? Just about life or just about like our families or what we've done, because it was so task oriented. I think we got used to getting on Zooms, getting our meeting done and going to the next Zoom, right? It was like Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. And it feels awkward sometimes when you have a large space of people to have like a conversation with one other person because there's, 50 other people also observing your conversation unless you're in a breakout room. So I think that this is so important that we remember that sometimes I'll recommend to administrators, like just take 5 minutes at the beginning or the end of your meeting to let people talk to each other, right? Like we just need time to connect. And that's to me, that story piece, just to be with one another. So students, these are nothing that I think are like, whoa, this is brand new, but it's maybe a reminder. It's so important to meet and greet our students. As I said, I didn't love my bus duty, but I know that was vital is meeting. I was usually the end of the day too, standing by the door. So you can, that's important to see our students, to see how they're doing. I think sometimes we can even change. So sometimes with a smile, right? We can maybe have that emotional contagion effect and maybe kind of like take them out of the funk that they're in, so to speak. It's vital to know our students' names and making sure that we pronounce them correctly. Our names are vital to who we are and our identity. And so if it takes you, 20 times to make sure you've got the student's name correctly, that's great. And they will really be happy that you did that. And there'll be a lot of respect earned by doing so. I love to, I leave a lot of comments online, but just a personal note on an assignment. So knowing, like acknowledging maybe the effort or the energy or something that maybe you connected with is really important. So I think that also helps build support. And then this is more of an educator strategy when we think about schools. So we are going to have students with behavioral issues, right? Yes. But maybe instead of what we often do is time out, or we send students away, either from the learning environment, or we send students away to a different room or a different office. A time in is a different approach to this when we think about supporting students. So is there an area that they can be with a trusted adult? And to me, it's always like, who would be that trusted adult for them, right? Making sure it's someone that they feel safe with, that they feel like they have a connection with. And so often it's maybe they just need time to talk with someone, right? Like they need that someone to be able to process what's happening, that what got them to that behavioral outburst. And so it's just a different approach. Instead of time out, it's really thinking about the time in to rebuild that connection before we do correct. So it's always connecting before we correct. And then how do we do support? So this is like where I think self-care comes in, right? That me piece. So it helps us cope with stressors. It helps us build new skills, which we always need to be thinking about our own neuroplasticity and what we're continuously learning. Self-compassion. So while I love self-esteem, but self-compassion is really important because we're not going to get things right all the time. We are not perfect. And so how can we be kind to ourselves and show the kindness to ourselves and the love to ourselves that we so often give to other people? And then healthy boundaries would be the last area here. So when I think about self-care, we have to make it a priority. It has to become something that is a habit for ourselves. This is just a little list. I had cards made once, I guess, and I was like, I think I can put on here, but these are just ideas, but it needs to be meaningful for you. So if you're not an outdoor person and you don't have access to an indoor track, you may not want to do taking a walk, right? Maybe it's just a call with a friend. Maybe it's reading for pleasure. Again, these are just some ideas that it's what is going to work for you, but really the idea is being intentional. I always say start small and like 10 minutes a day. Like, how can you take 10 minutes and schedule it just like you would have scheduled this training or scheduled a meeting, right? So how do you schedule it in your day so you have a minimal 10 minutes for yourself each day? And then here's again that idea of self-compassion. We are humans, we make mistakes, but the idea is how can we learn from them? And so taking care of yourself, being kind to yourself, accepting where you are in this very moment. One of the things that we talk about is like if you have your best friend or a great trusted colleague that had this mistake happen or had this challenge, what would you say to that person? What would you say to your best friend or this great colleague that you have? And then what if that happens to you? What are your internal voices saying to you? Is it that same love and kindness that you just shared with your best friend? Or is it that critical voice that's saying, I can't believe you did this. You're smarter than that, right? Like, and if that's it, try to catch that, try to grab those critical voices and critical thoughts and say, I need to be practicing self-compassion right now. And so I think it's really important, again, for that wellness piece so we can connect and give to others. Boundaries is so important. So yes, it's okay to say no. My former dean always said, when you say no, that's an opportunity for someone else to say yes. And so it's maybe a way of thinking about, I know sometimes I have a difficulty of saying no. And I'm like, well, if I say no, someone else can probably say yes to this experience. So it's really important. Every healthy relationship, if you think about those that you have in your life, they have psychological space, emotional space, and physical space. You've established that somehow, right? So having those boundaries is going to help you establish and maintain healthy relationships. The other thing I think about with boundaries is if you kind of have a relationship that you're like, I'm not sure this is maybe as healthy as it needs to be, analyze and think about the amount of energy that you're putting into that relationship compared to how much you're getting from that. So it should be pretty balanced, right? And I know at certain times, some relationships you may be giving more and not getting as much or vice versa. And that's normal, right? With kind of cycles of life. But for the most part, it's a good way to see if your boundaries are intact, if there's this equal give and get in the amount of energy being put into those relationships. And so the last one is T, and I think about transitions in this way. Yeah, we can't ever hit pause. Life is always constantly changing. And so that's why I think all these other pieces are so important, our resilience, our emotional well-being, the support that we have, and then just knowing life's going to be full of transitions, right? So how do we be prepared and be proactive? To me, it's that practice, self-care and social emotional learning. And when we do it enough, it becomes a habit. It becomes hardwired in our brain. So it's going to be the first thing that we go to. So that's that proactive piece. Making sure that we are adaptable and we're open to new opportunities and new experiences. And the way that we perceive them is with a positive lens rather than like, oh, not this again, right? So we have that cognitive flexibility and then just being growth oriented. So knowing that life is about continuous self-improvement, knowing that we're going to make mistakes, that's the human condition. So that self-compassion, but also with the intent of what can I learn to move forward and be resilient. So I think about these kind of things when we think about transitions. So within student, I love thinking about mindfulness practices within the student piece. And again, you saw that kind of come up earlier too. So mindfulness to me boosts so many different areas, but whether that be a transition from maybe class to class, from an activity to another activity. So often, even when I've got my graduate students coming in and most of them have been working almost a full day, we do evening classes, we need a moment, right? Just to like breathe and acknowledge whatever has just happened in our day. And then be able to put that aside, let it go, and then transition, right, to what we're getting ready to focus on. So this can be really important for our students as well. And so we can be able to, I think, engage in the here and now experiences more when this again becomes like that habit a practice that we continuously tap into. And again, not just something when we think we need it, but because it's just a part of who we are and the experiences that we have with others. So here's a couple of different things within the adults. So often I think acknowledging the big and small wins, we have a hard time. And I think goals are great, don't get me wrong. But so often when change happens, it's hard to see that there's still small wins in each of our days, in each of the tasks that maybe we had in each of the goals. Because as we know, change has kind of been constant. So we have this great big goal in place, and then something new comes along and we don't get to quite meet that goal. But how can you analyze and look for both those big wins at the end of the day, but also just the little small wins and celebrate them, right? Acknowledge them. And then there's something within transitions about the productive struggle. And so that's that growth oriented mindset. If I think about the story of the butterfly and the person that was watching this butterfly try to come out of the cocoon, he found some scissors, he cut the cocoon to help the butterfly out. And in the end, that only did more damage, right? The butterfly didn't thrive and survive because that butterfly needs to struggle to develop its wings so it can fly. So productive struggle is kind of the same thing, right? We have to be able to know life's going to come with hardships, life's going to come with change, but how do we engage in that and know that we have the ability to, again, thrive and survive? And I kind of put the hard fun, right? So the feeling that hard is the feeling of your brain developing, it's strengthening and growing. So how can I have that mindset, that thinking behind when life does have struggles or challenges is, okay, this is my brain's opportunity to grow, right? To gain some new experiences, some new skills, and hopefully some new knowledge, and maybe even develop some new relationships along the way. So with transition specifically, when I was leaving my school building, I knew I had to have a visual reminder of acknowledging my workday was ending as well, because I had a tendency of bringing home the things that I was working on in my head or the students that I was seeing. It was hard. It's hard to shut that down. So it's important to know that there's an end point in our workday as well. And so I had kind of a sign. There was a sign that I would drive by, and that was kind of my visual image to say, I need to hit pause right now and acknowledge my day and try to examine either points of gratitude or what were my small wins, right? So I don't continuously focus on my day, nor do I have a tendency sometimes to ruminate on all the things that didn't get done or the things that I don't feel like went well. And so I think it's important to, again, during that point of transition, acknowledge the things you're grateful for, or again, the small wins throughout your day, because that switching off is super important. So kind of to ask you the question, what's your switch off right at the end of the day? How do you acknowledge my workday is over and now I need to focus on my personal life, my own well-being, whatever it may be as you end your workday. So I have just a couple more slides about mindfulness. Mindfulness practice, thinking about those mindful moments. Kind of what I was just reiterating is this first one is really focusing on the good things and taking a moment to really engage with those positive things instead of letting them go through our sieve, so to speak. If you think about a sieve, that we tend to let all of the good things flow through and we kind of let all the big things kind of collect and we focus on the negative. But how can we maybe reverse that, right? And focus on the positive things and really give our attention to those, noticing our attitude about our thoughts and feelings, and trying to be, again, that self-compassionate. That's, to me, that positive mindfulness. And then just being intentional. With this takes intentionality, it takes focus, it takes time, and it takes patience. I know when I started with my own mindfulness practice, it was really weird for me, I'll be honest. I didn't love it. I'm like, I could be doing 100 emails right now. I could be doing so many different things, but I knew by the science, this was important. So I just did a minute every day. And now I am a huge believer and practicer of mindfulness, and I have seen the benefits. And so again, just be intentional about this work as well. And I just wanted to share 2 specific strategies. And if these are, I have these available in PDFs. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to share those. But this is just the figure 8. And I like tactile things. And so if I think about tracing my hand, And you can do that anywhere. No one's going to really know that you're doing it. Cause I know my students that I work with are always like, but people will know. And I'm like, no one's going to know if you're just kind of tracing your hand, or we had some other, mindful breathing practices. So this is one. And again, for students or for adults. And then progressive muscle relaxation is a great other kind of sensory mindful strategy. And so just again, kind of walking you through starting at the top of your body or the bottom, whichever way, and squeezing and releasing, and kind of understanding what's happening within your body. Again, a lot of us hold tension and stress and anxiety and nerves and all those different feelings within our bodies. So it's a great way to start, again, that mind, body, emotion awareness. So I just wanted to end kind of, hopefully this is not just the T part, but all of the rest, right? So to be able to be restful and to practice the acronym of REST, I think it's really important to revisit the story of the two wolves. And so this kind of visual helps us remember, like, where are we focusing our attention and our time and our energy? Are they the things that we really don't have control over? As you can see, some of the things that I've listed, like we can't really control the action of others. We can't really control how other people think. We can't control what has happened or what might happen in the future. So again, I know there's other things there, the length of the pandemic. Those are things we can't control. So if we're feeding, right, these are the things we're feeding on, we're going to become agitated and irritated and burnout and et cetera, et cetera. So are our students. So the idea is to really focus on that inner circle. What are the things you have control over? And it's your attitude, your boundaries, showing kindness to others, how you're responding. Again, you can see all those things listed. So I would just encourage you to maybe revisit that story and revisit what you feel like is in your inner circle of control, and really try to prioritize your time, your energy, and your focus there, because that you'll be able to hopefully rest and become able to thrive and survive all of the constant changes that are thrown our way. Here's my contact information. I know it was listed up there earlier. Feel free to contact me if I can be of any support. And I'm also happy to share with Stephanie or Meredith or Joe any of the other documents that were kind of embedded in my presentation as well.
Well, thank you, Brandi, so much. I took copious notes. In particular, that I need to practice true self-compassion and to develop a personal mantra, as well as I was doing the figure 8 on my hand while you were talking. And you're right, no one would notice. And it was really very, very helpful. So thank you so much. We are happy to take some questions in the Q&A. So please add your questions there. I know that we're running up on time. So if you do have questions that we don't get to today, please feel free to share them with us, and we can try to get back to you either on social media or directly to you. But just to get us started, how can educators, counselors, families, and school communities really best equip students to successfully navigate that high school to college transition by understanding the long-lasting impacts of the pandemic and how that is really going to influence all of us, and with students mostly, both their academic success and their social emotional growth?
All right, can I have you say that one more time? I was like focusing, and so can you ask that question one more time?
I can, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, wait a minute.
No, sorry. So how can all of us, educators, counselors, families, our communities, best equip students to successfully navigate the high school to college transition, both from like a social emotional growth perspective and the influences that they have on their academic success?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it starts as early as possible, right? And that's why I think, we are focused on high school to college transition. I understand that, but it has to start as early as we can in our schools. So I always think about, preschool on up, but especially that support people, I think, is so critical. I have launched so I have 2 in college right now, one that's graduated and one that will go next year. So and my 2 boys, those 2 younger ones, have really been the pandemic kids. They were in the midst of everything. And so the social support was really critical, but so they needed to know their friends and how they could contact people if they were in quarantine, right? So I feel like the ability for them to tap who are their people was really important. And then also for them to have healthy coping strategies, because plans get changed, and that's really frustrating for our students, right? And how do they are able to really implement healthy coping strategies and have that growth oriented mindset? Yes, it is horrible that you can't go to this concert because you're in quarantine, but how can you like reframe that of like, what else can you do, and what other new event can you look forward to? So I think it's a lot of like that negative self talk, and try to replace that. I think about frustration tolerance and just acknowledging and validating it sucks sometimes. Like, yes, I am really sorry, right? I'm not minimizing your experience, are really important. I guess that's what I've seen to try to help our students.
I think we're almost at time, so I think we'll stop there. I think that's also a really great place to end. Thank you again so much. I'm going to just share our contact info one more time, so all of you can see it. And again, if you do have other questions that we did not get to, please, please, please reach out to us. Our contact information is there. And I would also love to ask for all of you all to share your feedback in our survey that we will share by email shortly. And our next session is next week on March 8th. We love test optional, but what does that mean for students? So hope to see you all then. Hope to see those of you in the Indianapolis area, in Indiana on March 15th. And again, Brandi, thank you so, so much. And thank you all for joining us for our first session.